Hello! This is Hooked by Happenstance. I'm Kendra, and it is time for chapter 23 of Yarn Tales. Now, Yarn Tales is my ongoing series here at Hooked by Happenstance, where I read books, I tell you a bit about them, and then I apply some silly Kendra rules to my rating system of the book, and I add a segment to my reading shawl. Now, my reading shawl began as this project to make a tangible, log of the things I was reading this year, and I thought I might get around to 12 to 15 books and have enough to make one shawl for the year. Well, this has inspired me to read so much more that obviously I am on book 23. So this has grown from one shawl into two. Now I am quite a ways into my second shawl, and this is the time period when I was doing Buzzwordathon. Now, Buzzwordathon is a readathon where you read books that pertain to the particular buzzword. Ordinarily, there is one buzzword per cycle, but this time it was who, what, when, where, why, and how. So there were 6 choices over the week of the readathon, and I read many of them. We will talk about them as we get to them. In the previous chapter, I covered why, in why we make things and why it matters. And today, I'm going to tell you about the book, How to Eat Fried Worms, the second Buzzwordathon book that I read. Now, I consumed this book with my children via audiobook, and we listened to it through RB Digital, which is the audiobook service that I get through my local, this one comes through the Kansas State Library service. I have multiple library services that I use, both through my local library as well as the state library system, which gives me access to different places, and I get all of my audiobooks for free. Now, we listened to this through my computer hooked up to our TV, so that we had nice speakers, and it took us 2 or 3 evenings. It's not a particularly long book, but it also, it's a book that's kind of repetitive. Now, I remember this book from when I was little. It's written by Thomas Rockwell, and I forget when it actually came out, but this book is, it's pretty old, because I know I read it 25 plus years ago, so it's been out for a very long time. And it's not a very long book, but the premise of the book is there is a group of friends, 3 boys, 3 or 4, I think it's 3. Anyways, there is a group of friends, and they are talking one day, and basically they dare one of the kids to eat 15 worms in 15 days, one every day. And he's like, oh, I can do that. And then they bet money on whether or not he will complete it. Well, the book goes through the whole adventure of him finding the worms, eating the worms, finding ways to consume them more palatably. And it shows his friends who thought he was going to, duck out early and not finish the challenge. They start to get real worried because they're going to be parted with their money quite quickly. So they do everything they can to stand in his way. They take him to a carnival and get him, super full on treats in the hopes that he will just fall asleep and forget to eat his worm. They write pretend doctor's notes. They contact his mother. And this was my favorite thing in this book. And I remember this part of the book from when I was little. They contact his mom in the hopes that she will be just appalled that her son is eating these fried worms, and she will put a stop to it, right? Oh no. She is like, well, you can't lose. So she goes out of her way to make this a more pleasant experience for him, make the worms more appetizing, and that way he can beat his friends. So it's one of those funny things where sometimes with certain parents, you just don't know what you're getting into. And my kids definitely enjoyed that because they were like, that would totally be you, Mom, if you found out. I'm like, oh, definitely. Because there's nothing wrong with eating worms. Especially, the worms I talk about finding are organic, so to speak. So there's no risk of pesticides or anything. Now, it is an interesting point that I had to point out to my kids. Because this book is so old, I had to remind them that this book is in a world where there is no internet. In a world where there might not even be an easy way to search for facts about the safety of eating worms via your library. Because that is not a world that my kids live in. You should just be able to Google, is it dangerous to eat worms? And you can find out. You can find out which worms are and are not dangerous and in what quantities and all the things. But in this book, it's not that you suspend that reality. That was not a reality when this book came out. So that was just an interesting thing. And it's a cute little, it's a short little adventure of these friends. There's not a lot of character development. There's like no world building. There's not even like a huge adventure plot. It's just a plain old little story, and it was pleasant, the story part. Now I will say, having read this book via physical book when I was a kid, and hearing it via audiobook, the physical book is so much better. This audiobook was like the worst audiobook that we have experienced when I've been listening to books with the kids. And it wasn't that there was an accent issue, because that has been the previous problem we have had, is accents, especially like heavy British accents, are very popular in a lot of American audiobooks because a lot of Americans seem to be Anglophiles and really like enjoy that voice. Even if they're books that are not set in a place where the characters would have British accents, which I always think is weird when that's the case. But those just tend to be kind of a popular thing that narrators of audiobooks have, is these heavy English accents. And it can be really hard for my children to understand what's being said, especially the younger one. If, you know, you're trying to get a lot of information fairly quickly through an audiobook, and you can always understand a book that is at a higher reading level when you're hearing it like through like an auditory means than you can when you're reading the words because of the way your brain works. So you can tend to read up in grade level if you're being read the story. But if the accent is too heavy, it's like an extra deciphering step that is very difficult. And that was not a problem in this. We just didn't like the narration. The person who read the book, his voice was fine, and his voices for the different kids was fine. It was just kind of meh. But they had some music that was added, and it added nothing to the story. It just detracted and was very weirdly tempoed for what was going on, and we just did not enjoy that part. So overall, my rating for How to Eat Fried Worms was a 3-star. It was a fine book. It was just kind of meh. Good enough. It's a nice little story. It serves its function, which is not a huge function. But it serves a beautiful function in my reading shawl. Okay, so now we're going to take a look. I use 4 different yarns for my shawl. I have a yarn for books with my kids, books for my Life's Library subscription, physical books I experience by myself, and audiobooks I experience by myself. This one is obviously from the With My Kids category. And I used Cattails yarn in the Lady Celine base, which is from her Wheel of Time collection. And the 3 stars, actually, it just worked out beautifully. There is a different stitch pattern for each of the yarn types. And this happens to be one of the like more open lacy ones that goes with this yarn. And I'm really looking forward to when this is done and I block it to see what this looks like when that lace blocks out. But since it was part of a readathon, I went ahead and threw some beads in this row. I used these blue, like little glass, I don't know what you call them. They're like square pointy beads. And I went ahead and threw those in. And I didn't do them in every pattern section. I did them in every other one because I was worried about adding too much weight to the shawl. This is toward, you know, the bottom, so it's going to help pull the lace open. So it should serve a nice function for me to have beads added into the readathon rows. But if I add too much weight, it might spread the lace more than I want and make the shawl a little unwieldy. So I'm kind of trying to cut the difference because this is not the last book I read during Buzzwordathon. So you'll have to come back to hear about the rest of the books that I consumed for that. If you'd like to see the other things that have happened so far in Yarn Tales, there's a playlist here on the channel that has all the chapters in there in case you missed any. And if you want to make sure that you don't miss out on the rest of those chapters I talked about, subscribe down below because my videos do not come out on a predictable schedule, and that is the best way to make sure that they just float to the top of your subscription box and you don't miss out on them. and I will see you all next time. Bye!